Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this presentation. I want to start out by thanking my co-authors for helping to create the presentation. Kurt and I are from the USDA National Wildlife Research Center. Justin Foster is from the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, and Jim Beasley is from the University of Georgia. I also want to thank the bait manufacturers for their efforts and risks that they're taking to develop a pig toxicant that can help reduce some of the damages that wild pigs cause. So wild pigs are an invasive species in the U.S. and cause billions of dollars worth of damage to agriculture uh, each year in the U.S. Toxic baits could be a new tool for us to help reduce some of this damage. So I'll start out by talking about what attributes make an ideal toxic bait for wild pigs. First, we want it to be species specific, meaning it doesn't attract and kill other species. Secondly, we want it to be effective, so it needs to remove a large portion of the population of wild pigs. It needs to be something that pigs will readily eat. We want it to have minimal secondary risks so that we don't harm scavengers of the carcasses of poisoned pigs. Minimal hunter risks so that the toxicant doesn't ever enter the human food chain. We want minimal pain and distress for the wild pigs so they don't suffer. And it's always good if there's an antidote available in case of an accidental exposure. So developing a toxic bait for wild pigs can be very difficult for a number of reasons here. First, if you're baiting wild pigs, you're also baiting all other species of wildlife. And so it's going to require bait stations to keep the toxic bait from being accessed by these non-target animals. Secondly, pigs are really neophobic, which means they're wary of new things and new foods. And so if you can imagine an odd-looking bait station out there with a different smelling and tasting bait in it, it might be hard to get pigs to eat it. Lastly, pigs can be messy eaters, especially if you consider a group of 10 to 20 pigs all trying to eat together, biting each other and pushing each other around. You can imagine that some bait is going to be spilled outside of the bait station. There are two toxic baits currently under review by regulators and the public here in the U.S. The first is kaput, which is a warfarin-based bait. It was registered by the U.S. EPA in 2018 for use in the U.S., but no states have yet allowed for its use. You can see a picture here of that bait and the bait station that goes with it, that green hog stopper bait station. The second toxic bait is Hog-On, which is 5% sodium nitrate, and that's been under development in the U.S. since 2014 and is nearing completion of some EPA-required testing to be submitted for registration. So it is not currently registered yet. I'll make the disclaimer that I've been working on the research and development of Hog-On for about 6 years, but all of us co-authors have also worked with kaput, and we are familiar with both products. And so I don't want this presentation to come across as pro-Hog-On or pro-kaput. I just want to focus on what's been published in the literature, what studies have been completed, and some of the bait manufacturer instructions. So we're just looking at the facts of both of these products. The truth is, I think it'd be good if both of these products could be available and used safely for control of wild pigs in the U.S. because we need more tools to help us. If neither of these products can be proven to be safe and effective, then I personally don't think that either of them should be available. So I'll start out with talking about kaput and what we know about warfarin, which is the active ingredient. Warfarin has been used as a rodenticide since 1952, and it's also used in human medicine as a blood thinner. We know that pigs are highly susceptible relative to some other mammals, and that's been shown in some pen trials in Australia and the US. Birds are not very susceptible to warfarin, which is a good thing. There's low persistence of warfarin in carcass tissues of pigs, especially when you compare this to second-generation anticoagulants. A lot of warfarin gets excreted by the pigs before they die. It can take multiple feedings and multiple days for pigs to succumb from a warfarin bait, and there is an antidote available, which is vitamin K1. So now I'll talk about how the bait manufacturer recommends that kaput is used. The first step is to condition the pigs to come to a bait site and start eating out of these hog stopper feeders. And so you install 1 to 3 hog stoppers at a bait site, you secure the lids completely wide open, and you fill the feeder with something non-toxic like corn, soured corn, or they have a kaput feral hog lure. And they recommend leaving them at this stage for about 1 to 3 weeks so pigs get used to coming in and eating. And then if pigs are coming in and eating well, it's time to deploy the toxic bait. So we close the 18-pound guillotine doors, we place in the toxic bait, we monitor and refresh these sites every 2 to 4 days. We remove any spilled bait while we're there refreshing the bait. And the bait manufacturers, in some research that they did, they left the bait stations at this stage for about 4 weeks. And then the label also says that the carcasses have to be disposed of properly, which could mean burying them on site or any other methods that are determined proper by state and local authorities. So it's possible that the state and local authorities could say that the carcasses don't need to be buried, they can be left where they are. Okay, and so some results from field studies using kaput. Bait consumption, there are some mixed results here. There's been 2 studies done that I know that are completed, one in Texas and one in South Carolina. The first, they found about a ½ kilogram per day was consumed by pigs in Texas, but in South Carolina, they found that 0 kilograms per day were consumed. Efficacy kind of mimics those results. Good efficacy reported in Texas with 100% of radio transmitted pigs. In South Carolina, because the pigs didn't eat the bait, obviously they had 0% mortality in the radio transmitted pigs. Non-targets, there were 0 non-target carcasses found in either study, but with some caveats to that. In the Texas trial, there were no radio transmitters on any non-targets. And so if you can imagine a raccoon, if it gets enough of this warfarin bait, might take 8 or 9 days to die. That would be really hard to find without a radio transmitter. In the South Carolina study, because no pigs were getting in and accessing the bait, there really was no chance for any non-target carcasses or any non-target animals to access the bait either. So maybe this hasn't quite been tested yet. Spilled bait, in Texas, they found 15.5 grams of spilled bait during 4 weeks, so not a whole lot. But then another study in Louisiana that tested this bait station found that during 95% of feeding events, corn was spilled outside of the bait station. So that shows that the problem could be a little bit more severe. Lastly, bait station access. This was not reported in Texas, so we don't know what happened there for sure. In South Carolina, it was shown that closing the feeders down reduced access by pigs nearly 100%. And then closing the feeders down in Louisiana reduced access by pigs by 66%. And so I also want to go over the picture here with the blue dye in the pigs. The good thing about this bait is that if pigs eat it, their fat inside their body turns blue. And so it's really obvious to see if you open up the pig that it had access to this bait. All right, so now I'm going to switch and talk about sodium nitrite, which is the active ingredient in Hogon. Sodium nitrite is a food preservative, something that we eat every day in cured meats. In large doses, though, it can be lethal. It blocks the ability of blood to transport oxygen to organs. That's called methemoglobinemia. And it can be toxic to all animals in large doses. It tastes pretty bad, so it needs to be hidden from pigs, and we do that by microencapsulating the sodium nitrite. At a 5% concentration, which is in Hogon, it only takes 1 to 2 bites for a pig to get a lethal dose. And the pigs are generally dead in 2 to 3 hours. And the good thing about sodium nitrite is that it metabolizes very fast inside the body. So most of the sodium nitrite is already gone by the time the pig dies. And so the carcasses are safe for scavengers to eat. There is an antidote, which is methylene blue, but it's not very realistic that somebody would have time to get that antidote if they were exposed to too much sodium nitrite. So this is how we recommend using Hogon. We condition pigs to a bait site just using corn on the ground for about 1 to 5 days. If pigs aren't showing up within 5 days, we know that it's not a very good bait site and we should just be trying someplace else. If pigs do show up, we place the bait station on the ground with corn inside of it. We have the lids fully open for 1 to 2 days so the pigs get used to eating out of the bait station. Then we close the lids down to a gap of about 2 inches, so they have to lift it a little bit to eat. And if they're still doing well with that after 2 days, we close the lids entirely and we place in a placebo bait, which is basically just hog on, just without the sodium nitrite in it. We do that for 1 to 2 days, and the lids of the bait station are locked down with about 30 pounds of magnetic pressure, and so really only pigs are able to access that. If pigs are eating that placebo bait really well, it's time to deploy the toxic bait. So we just do a switcheroo. We change out the placebo bait with a toxic bait. We secure in about 12 trays of the toxic bait, which are 0.625 kilograms each. And we've only been deploying the toxic bait for 1 night. But honestly, I think we could deploy it for 2 or 3 nights. There's no reason not to if there are some surviving pigs. Now, the morning after we've deployed the toxic bait, there's some work that has to be done. We need to deploy a bird deterring device to keep those early morning feeding birds away from the bait station, because there might be some small particles of spilled bait. And then when we arrive, we remove any spilled bait and we turn over the dirt, or we cover up the dirt in case there are some small particles of spilled bait that we can't see. And the good thing about sodium nitrite is that we can leave the carcasses where they lay. We don't have to bother picking them up because the carcasses are safe. And so here's a picture of our bird deterring device. We just recently implemented this in our baiting strategy. We start these things up about 1.5 hours before sunrise, and our research shows that pretty much all the pigs are dead by then. So we're not scaring away pigs with this. We're just scaring away birds and any other non-targets. And when we use these things, we've seen 0 non-targets come into these bait sites, and so it's really effective at keeping those non-targets away. And so results from some field studies with hog on, we've had good bait consumption, anywhere between 5 and 9 kilograms per day in some field trials that we've done. Efficacy, we've been finding a lot of pig carcasses, and it's been representing anywhere between 76 and 91% of the population. And again, that's only with 1 night of toxic baiting, so we could probably do better than that with more nights. Non-targets, this is where hog on has been having some problems. There are small particles of spilled bait outside of the bait station. And so in studies where we were not using the scary snake, we were finding 3 crows in Queensland, Australia. We found 2 possums in Alabama, in a study in Alabama, and we found 35 passerine birds in a study in Texas. But then we started using that scary snake because we knew this was becoming a problem. And so when we used that snake, we found 0 non-targets in the study in Texas. And at some sites where we weren't using the snake, we found 2 mice. Spilled bait, that's where these non-target problems are coming from. We have little bits of spilled bait out there. We found anywhere between 24 to 55 grams of spilled bait, and some of them are little tiny particles that are really hard to even see, but I think they're like perfect size for a little bird to eat. And then bait station access has been really good. This bait station was purposefully designed to allow all pigs to access. And in all of our field tests, we found all age classes of pigs dead, from the smallest piglets to the biggest boars. And so we know that all pigs are getting good access. All right, and so now I'm going to move on to a comparison table of these 2 products, and based on the attributes that we think make a good pig toxic bait. And I'm going to color these cells green if I think it's good, red if it's bad, and yellow if it is somewhere in the middle. So I'll start with kaput. For effectiveness, I colored it yellow because there have been mixed results, anywhere between 100 to 0% lethality for pigs. Species specific, I didn't color this one because I think truly it's untested at this point. And so there needs to be some tests done there. Palatability, I similarly colored this one yellow because I think it was shown to be pretty palatable in Texas in one study, but not in South Carolina. Minimal secondary risks, I colored this yellow. I think it could potentially be green, but as far as I know, it hasn't been tested yet. I'd like to see some carcasses of poisoned pigs being offered to some captive coyotes or vultures to know for sure that there are no effects. Minimal hunter risks. I colored this green because there's a blue dye. That blue dye that goes into the fat of pigs makes it very obvious if these pigs have been consuming this toxic bait. Minimal pain and distress. I colored this one red because it takes 8 days for pigs to die from internal bleeding, which is probably not very comfortable. An antidote, I colored that green because vitamin K1 works really well as an antidote. Bait station, I colored that red because I think it does reduce feeding by pigs, and so there needs to be some work on improving that design. And then baiting duration, I colored that yellow because it just depends how patient of an operator you are. It could take up to 5 to 10 weeks for deploying this bait, which is longer than toxic or than trapping, but it might be less effort than trapping. All right, now moving on to Hog. For effectiveness, I colored it green because it's been pretty high with just 1 night of toxic baiting. For species specific, I colored that red because we know that it kills non-targets, and especially if we're not mitigating those small particles of spilled bait. For palatability, yes, we've had good palatability, greater than 50% consumption of our bait, and that's really good if you consider that this is an acute toxic bait, and pigs might start to feel sick from eating this really quickly. And so the fact that they're still consuming a lot of it, I think means that it must taste pretty good. Minimal secondary risks. This is green because we have tested, we've given coyotes and vultures some poisoned pig carcasses, and we've seen no effects from that. Minimal hunter risks. I colored that green because pigs are dead so quick. The only way there'd really be a risk is if a hunter is hunting over the bait site. And then secondly, these pigs have a really dark, almost black colored blood from that hypoxia. And so it's obvious that something is wrong with the carcass. There's minimal pain and distress because pigs are dead within 3 hours from hypoxia. There is an antidote, methylene blue, but I colored it red because it's not very realistic that a person would get it in time. Bait station, yes, that's really good. We have nearly 100% access by all age classes of pigs. And then the baiting duration is about 10 to 14 days, which is pretty equivalent to trapping. And so if we look at these side by side, obviously you can see Hog has more green, but I think kaput has potential to have a similar amount of green if some of these palatability and bait station issues could be overcome. And I think that it is pretty likely that those can be overcome. And so really, I think that these could be pretty comparable to each other. So I'm just going to end with some take-home messages on what I think are the advantages and disadvantages of each product. With kaput, a huge advantage is that it is already federally registered by the US EPA, so it's overcome a big hurdle there. Spillage is not acutely toxic to non-target animals, which is good. The blue dye in the fat of pigs makes it pretty friendly for hunters. The large bait hopper on the hog stopper bait station doesn't require daily visits to replenish, which is nice. And then just a general comment about chronic poisons is that they may be less aversive to wild pigs because pigs don't know that they're slowly getting poisoned. With Hog, some advantages are that we see some really high palatability, good lethality. We have good access to the bait station. It's a pretty fast application process, taking a week and a half to 2 weeks. It's been proven to be safe for scavengers. We have minimal pain and distress for the pigs. Actually, the hypoxia is pretty similar to carbon monoxide poisoning, so the pigs aren't suffering. And another good thing about Hog is that the operators know what is killed. The pigs and any of the non-targets are not going very far from the bait station, so you know you have a problem if there is one. Some of the disadvantages with kaput. So far, there have been mixed reports on palatability, mixed reports on access to the bait station. I think right now we have unknown scavenger hazards. It's a long application process, so taking anywhere from 5 to 10 weeks. There's longer amounts of pain and distress for the pigs, and it's not quite clear, how much pain and distress that they are under during that entire time. But taking 8 days to die is it could be potentially bad. And then carcass management, that's a big question mark for me. If the carcasses do have to be buried, that's a big undertaking. If the state and local authorities don't require the carcasses to be buried, then that's no big deal. With hog on, a big disadvantage is that it's not registered yet by the EPA, so it still has a big hurdle to overcome. Small amounts of spillage can be they are acutely lethal to non-target animals. So that has to be overcome with some extra effort, which is using those scary snakes and then coming in quickly and trying to pick up any spilled bait. So there's extra effort to mitigate that spilled bait. And also the bait station is not really large, so it has to be rebaited daily. And so I'll end with that. And here's all of our contact information. And we'd certainly be happy to take any questions or send you any citations or references. And I really appreciate you tuning in. Thank you.